And welcome, Four-Eyed fans, back to another episode of Fourth and Frames, the fantasy football podcast for fantasyandframes.com. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards, and this week we have a smaller crew here, but if you'll notice, we have a very familiar face in Mr. Ken Sonnenberg. Ken and I, when we started doing the podcast here at fantasyandframes.com, we started doing the podcast here at fantasyandframes.com for a couple of years. And Ken's been away for a while, but you know what? We had to bring Ken back before the season was over. And what better time to bring him back and to talk about fantasy football in week one of the fantasy football playoffs. But before we get into that, let me go back and welcome Ken. Hi, Ken.
Hey, Jorge, how's it going? It's good to be back.
Good, good. We missed you, my friend. How are things?
It's great. I'm back from my sabbatical hunting really large bats in New Zealand. For science purposes, of course.
For science, well, that's amazing. You're able to travel to New Zealand with COVID and all that. So that's fantastic.
Oh yeah, I got secret planes and boats. It was a whole Indiana Jones thing.
That is a much more interesting story than I had. I went to KFC and then came home. That was my dinner routine for the past few nights. So
maybe for one of these episodes, I will fill you all in on my on those travels.
Sounds good. Did you happen to watch the Thursday night football game yesterday with the Patriots and the Rams?
Unfortunately, I did not, because I was sitting there crunching numbers for our Four-Eyed Championship.
For those of you who have been participating, or those that may not be aware, a bunch of us here at Fantasy and Frames over the summer created a charity tournament called the Four-Eyed Championships, and we start the playoffs this week. We have 4 division winners and 4 wild card members. And how it basically works is the 4 division winners automatically get $100 donated to their charity of choice. And then whoever comes out on top in the playoff tournament, that person will get an extra $400 donated to their charity of choice. The contestants didn't have to participate in the funding. This is all being done through Fantasy and Frames because we want to give back to all the charitable causes that we can, because, it is 2020. I don't have to tell you all how rough it's been for people. And so the more we can give back and help out people in need, the better that I think this world will be. So that's what we're doing. And Ken crunched all the numbers, crunched everything. And we now have officially released on Twitter at the Fantasy and Frames handle at Fantasy and Frames who's participating in the playoff brackets. So good luck to everybody participating in the playoffs, and for everybody who participated in the Four-Eyed Championships tournament all season long. Those who remember to set their rosters, which I think is a majority of people. Thank you for taking it seriously. Thank you for taking your charity seriously. And we're looking forward to doing it next year.
Yep. Congratulations to the Hans Mollman division, which I was in. It was a great season that everybody had a lot of fun. Congratulations to Mike Wallert.
So you want to hear a funny story about Mike Wallert?
I sure do.
So Mike Wallert, first of all, is a great IDP fantasy football follow. He's just a good follow in general. Ken, you'd like him. He knows all sorts of pro wrestling stats. Like, he goes back as far as we do in terms of our love for pro wrestling. He's a great follow for that, as well as IDP fantasy football. We had him on the Four-Eyed pregame show, which you can catch here at fantasyandframes.com, as well as on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m., where we cover every single game and all the fantasy relevant players. We had him join us one episode, and I mentioned him in our pre-show meeting, like, hey, you are killing it in the Four-Eyed Championships tournament. Like, it is ridiculous. You are up by so many points. We should just hand you the trophy now. And then 6 hours later, he texts me and he's like, way to go, Jorge. I'm finally losing a game thanks to you and you jinxing me earlier. So I promise I will not jinx anybody going forward. So good luck, Mike, and good luck to everybody else. All 4 divisions are represented in this tournament, so we're very happy about that. As as a commissioner, Ken, you're a commissioner too, and for Aaron and for Nate, who you all see regularly here at fantasyandframes.com. We couldn't be more proud of what we've done, and we want to do it again because we want to keep giving back to the community, and hopefully we'll expand the tournament next year to even more players. So looking forward to that. But you know what? Let's get into what we're really looking forward to, Ken, which is the fantasy football playoffs. We released our start and sit article yesterday, Thursday, covering every position, a player to start, a player to sit, and we're going to cover a few more tonight, as we're recording tonight on Friday. And of course, if there's a player that we don't cover or we don't get to, reach out to us. I'm at Jorge B. Edwards on Twitter. Ken, you're at Fantasy FB Ken1, I believe still.
Mhm.
It's been like 3 years. We have to work on that Twitter
And
handle.
hey, I like
I know you're
consistency.
hunting bats in New Zealand, but come on, we have
Yeah,
to.
I like that bats in New Zealand, but I like consistency.
I
Everybody
mean,
everybody knows my name.
well, there you go. And of course, you can reach out to us all at Fantasy and Frames on Twitter, as well as on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We will answer all of your questions heading in to the playoffs and through the playoffs and helping you get those 4A championships of your own, aka fantasy football titles. So let's get into it. Let's talk about some players that we like, players we don't like. And, we're just going to have fun with it tonight, folks. We're going to talk about some stats, talk about our gut feelings, talk about everything that we think you need to know as far as what you should think about inserting these players into your starting lineup this week. So let's talk about it. And since Ken's here, Ken's a Giants fan, let's talk about it. Daniel Jones, New York Giants. He's questionable, I believe, as of right now, but it looks like he's trending towards playing. Going against the Arizona Cardinals. What are your thoughts on your guy? What are your thoughts on your guy, Daniel Jones, just from a person who's just sitting there watching on TV, watching football, a Giants fan. What are your thoughts on Daniel Jones?
So to me, Daniel Jones had a lot of the Eli Manning in him. Daniel Jones, except in such a way as he had the passing, he was great. He doesn't have Eli where Daniel Jones actually rushes. So that was a good that was a nice surprise of that. But what Daniel Jones has that Eli had is Daniel Jones has a turnover problem. Eli had the problem of interceptions. Daniel Jones had a problem of fumbling. But I think over the last few weeks before his injury, it looks like he kind of may have started to fix that problem. I mean, he threw a lot of bad interceptions earlier this year, but he's now the last couple games, just particularly during this winning streak, it looks like he's cleaned a lot of that up.
We talk about the rushing yards for Daniel Jones. Let me just throw some stats your way. The famous offensive play type, the read pass option, the RPO, where the quarterback has the option of pulling the ball and running with it, or faking that they're going to be running with it and then really passing the ball. Mm-hmm. In terms of quarterbacks who are running and with the ball in the rushing yardage, guess where Daniel Jones ranks amongst all NFL quarterbacks this season?
He's got, being a Giant fan, I know this. He's got to be up there.
He is up there. He has the third most rushing yards off of RPO plays. He's only behind Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and that's it. And then below him, Deshaun Watson, Cam Newton, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, who everybody associates with him being one of those quarterbacks who can take off and run. Daniel Jones has 100 more rushing yards than Josh Allen does on the season. To be right there in the likes of Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson, that's just ridiculous. So, of course, for fantasy football purposes, those rushing yards count more than passing yards. So he's really a dual threat. And if the Giants are pulling it together, they're starting to make some moves here, both on offense and defense.
Oh yeah.
I'm kind of excited for him this week.
Yeah, Daniel Jones with his rushing, as long as he stays on his feet.
Are you worried about the Giants' offensive line?
No, I'm worried about Daniel Jones running and falling down because he gets tripped up by the turf monster.
Nice.
He'll never live down that run against Philadelphia.
Well, yeah, true. But he was hustling, man. I got to be honest with you.
What did they say? I think I saw something, and you can correct me. They say when he got to top speed, it was the fastest top speed that any quarterback, that includes Lamar Jackson and Pat Mahomes and all these quarterbacks, that was the largest top speed any quarterback has gotten to this year at the most on that run.
I think the stat came out that only Tyreek Hill was faster on a play.
Yeah.
Than Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
And let's go to the matchup. Going against the Arizona Cardinals, that is a tough defense, but the Cardinals are surrendering 19.7 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, 1.58 fantasy points, 253 passing yards. There is upside for this, and the Giants are on a hot streak. Their defense has been playing well, and what's really interesting is that the Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray is coming off of that AC joint sprain. He hasn't been looking good. I see this as a game where the Giants defense is just going to take it to Arizona Arizona, I believe, has only won the past is what 1 out of 5 the past 5 games.
Yeah.
It's the Cardinals are kind of heading in the opposite direction. I think the Giants are going in a positive direction, and if Daniel Jones is healthy, I think he's definitely a good starting option this week.
What's been a nice surprise is that and is the emergence of Wayne Gallman on at running back. Now it's teams don't have to spread themselves wide because they know they're going to throw it because their running backs are iffy. Wayne Gallman has been an RB1 or damn near close to RB1 these last few weeks. So
Right.
teams now have to account for that, which opens up the passing game for Daniel Jones, particularly for guys like Evan Engram. But for Jones, that is a huge help, and fantasy wise, that's a help for him.
When I think about other options for the Giants, who actually though for the Giants has been not targeted that much. I want to say, I'm exaggerating here. In the
I know
past
who you're
three
gonna say.
games, he's
I
had
know
like
who you're
a
gonna
target.
say. And, yeah, I know who you're gonna say, and I have him in a couple leagues, and it's kind of killing me.
I mean, Slayton is not doing his thing. I think it's becoming
He had one target last week.
that was ridiculous.
Yeah, but he caught it, but it was
Well,
one
good.
target.
I hope so. I hope
Yeah,
he's catching his only opportunity. I
yeah.
hope he's showing the exhibit. But like Evan Ingram, like you say, I'm really a fan of Golden Tate as the season goes on. I think him and Evan Ingram have some potential for upside there as far as facing defensive mismatches. And speaking of defensive mismatches, let's go on to our next quarterback here, and let's debate whether we think he's a start or a sit. And I'm talking about Kirk Cousins. Let me rattle off his fantasy points per game, or excuse me, his fantasy points scored for the past 5 weeks. 20.8, 18.6, 23, 26.2, 22.4. That's pretty darn good. That's like quarterback one, fantasy output. His yardage, going backwards now 305, 307, 314, 292, 220. I mean, his yardage has been going up incrementally the past few weeks. He's facing a Bucks team that's coming off of a bye. Look, the Buccaneers look discombobulated. Mike Evans might not even play. Their secondary cornerback for the Buccaneers may not play either. They have a great front seven. They're a former Giant, Jason Pierre-Paul, is playing lights out from a football perspective as well as a fantasy football perspective in IDP leagues. Who, by the way, you should definitely think about, if not, finding Pierre-Paul on your waiver wire, starting him this week if he is available to do so. But going back to Kirk Cousins, look, the Buccaneers are really good at, applying pressure to the quarterback. You have linebackers, Levante David and Devin White, who Devin White is, I think this is his second or third year in the pros. He is fantastic at not just making tackles on the running back, but also getting into coverage, covering those tight ends, as well as rushing the passer. He's kind of like a Jalen Smith of the Dallas Cowboys. He's that Swiss Army knife hybrid linebacker that can basically do everything you can ask of him. So when you think of that, and then you go against Kirk Cousins, look, you and I, we live in the Washington, D.C. area. We've seen Kirk Cousins, on our TVs quite a lot. And we've seen that, when push comes to shove, when he's under pressure, he's not exactly, Mr. Reliable,
Well, to me, actually, from a fantasy standpoint, he can be reliable. He wasn't reliable earlier in the year. He was god awful, but I think he's picked it up over the year. But what we being in the Washington area learned about Kirk Cousins is that he puts up stats. He will put up stats. He'll throw that interception with 3 minutes to go in the game if he's trying to lead a team down the field. But he does put up stats. So it's not a stretch to have him start this week. I mean, if you have the favorable matchup, and depending on who your other quarterback is, because I doubt that you're going to have Kirk Cousins on your team, or just Kirk Cousins on your team. For instance, I'm in one league where I have Kirk Cousins on my team, but I also have Tom Brady, so I have both quarterbacks in this game going.
That's well. Who are you starting?
No, I'm always starting Brady.
Really, you're riding Brady through the ups and downs, eh?
Yeah, because I think his weapons, he's still, yes, he's had a lot, there's been a lot of issues with his receivers, Godwin and Evans. Godwin's been in and out of the lineup. Evans is also, but I think consistently Brady has been the better quarterback this season.
It's also been the more clutch quarterback over the course of his career in real football stance.
Well,
You
yeah,
know, you know, I
he's a
don't know if you
great.
heard about Tom Brady before we
Yeah,
started
yeah.
talking about him. But
Yeah.
going back to Kirk Cousins, no, go
He's
ahead.
won a couple clutch games. Yeah.
A few.
Yeah.
But going back to Kirk Cousins, he's actually in terms of completion percentage when pressured, in like the top 12, I believe, in terms of passer rating. So he actually thrives in pressure situations in terms of putting up these stats, which are great for fantasy football purposes. So I'm with you. I think Kirk Cousins, even against this Buccaneers defense, has a lot of upside this week. Let's talk about a quarterback that we're not too high on. He has a great matchup against the Houston Texans. I thought he was going to have a field day last week against the Detroit Lions. He did not. I'm talking about Mitchell Trubisky. We don't have to get into too many stats here about Mitchell Trubisky. Tell me what your thoughts are really quickly on Mitchell Trubisky there.
If you're questioning whether you're going to start Mitchell Trubisky this week, and you have Mitchell Trubisky on your lineup, you are probably playing in the consolation bracket in your fantasy football league.
And don't be blunt. Don't beat around the bush there, Ken. Tell them what you really think.
Yeah, Mitchell Trubisky. Yeah.
I mean, he has the
Well,
rushing upside. He's shown in previous years that he's able to put stuff together, but
does.
the wheels are falling off in Chicago. This thing needs to be
Yeah.
blown up. It's
This whole thing's going to get blown up after the season. Trubisky will be gone probably. The coach will be gone after this season. You know, they traded for Nick Foles. I mean,
yeah.
that tells their GM will be gone, because that tells you everything you need to know about everything that's going on in Chicago. If you can't win, I mean, if you can't even keep games semi-close with a defense in Chicago that is a legitimately good defense, what does that tell you about your offense?
Right. No, you're very true. That's very true. Let's talk about another quarterback. Let's talk about Matt Stafford of the Detroit Lions. He had a great game last week against the Chicago Bears. I thought Trubisky was going to put up what Stafford did fantasy point production wise. That was not the case. He's going against the Green Bay Packers. Going back to week 2 this year against Green Bay, he got you 16 fantasy points, 244 passing yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Didn't look good. Had a completion percentage of just 60%. And that was without Kenny Galladay. That was without a lot of his weapons, without a firm running back situation solidified. And guess what? He's going up against the Green Bay Packers again without Kenny Galladay, without his running back situation solidified. I know DeAndre Swift is looking like he's going to play, but Adrian Peterson came out a few weeks ago and said, "Look, after DeAndre Swift got that concussion, he doesn't look right. Like, just as a human being, something is off."
I think he wasn't that a tweet and that quickly disappeared.
Yeah, so it's something to be said there. But regardless of the situation, look, the secondary for Green Bay is really good. Whether it's Jair Alexander at cornerback, who can shut down any wide receiver that he's guarding, Adrian Amos at safety, Darnell Savage, former Maryland Terrapin, our fellow alum there, Ken. He's playing lights out. He's playing really good in terms of playing in coverage as well as playing on the ball. Of course, safeties and IDP players, they get their upside from tackles for the most part. And I just don't see them. I don't see him personally, as you'll see in reading the four-eyed starts and sits article I publish at fantasyandframes.com. I don't think his skill set is going to be useful from an IDP perspective, because again, who's the running back? If it's DeAndre Swift, they're going to throw him to the outside. He's going to be a receiving option. If it's Adrian Peterson, I don't think Peterson's going to get enough volume to warrant Darnell Savage having the opportunity to rack up those tackles. So I'm in terms of an IDP option for this game. I think Adrian Amos and Jair Alexander are probably the two ones, because they're going to be playing in coverage most. But let's forget about IDP. Let's get back to Matt Stafford. You in on Matt Stafford this week? You think he pulls out one more miraculous cardiac cat performance?
Matt Stafford always could. Whatever you want. Matt Stafford has been throughout his career a very good quarterback, both regular quarterback and fantasy. He's been a great fantasy quarterback. I mean, he's over his career, his fantasy stats are right up there with some of. I mean, they're not they're not at crazy elite Lamar Jackson and Pat Mahomes levels, but or Lamar Jackson last year, not this year.
Right.
But he's always been a very consistently very good quarterback.
I mean, last year before he got injured, he was leading all quarterbacks, or at least he was the top two, I believe, in fantasy points per game scored, just below Lamar Jackson. I mean, everybody was on the hype train, but his weapons just haven't been healthy all year. I mean,
Yeah,
even with who he has now, he has got what, Marvin Jones, the next wide receiver that was performing well was Marvin Hall, but they just let him go last week. So
yeah,
it's really
Too many Marvins.
yeah, no, it's pretty interesting. And we look at other positions here. Um,
And
I thought,
Stafford's been hurt. Stafford's had a thumb injury.
yeah, he has a thumb injury, so it's we were going to do the show going position by position, but I think let's just segue to fantasy relevant players
Oh,
that
always just blow up the floor. Whenever I'm on the podcast or the show, it always just blows up the format.
yeah, no, we spend time on this rundown, we put together it, and we're like, okay, let's stick to this. And it's just whenever we get together, it's like, what, screw the plans, let's just swing it and have fun with it.
That,
For the Detroit Lions, look, TJ Hawkinson, I think he has a really good matchup this week. As primary defender for Green Bay should be Christian Kirksey, according to Pro Football Focus. And Kirksey has a completion percentage allowed, I want to say, around 80%. So he lets his opponent catch the ball a lot, which is, I hear, great for fantasy purposes if you're the person who has that pass catcher. Anybody else for Detroit that you have any, inklings about in terms of who can perform well?
I mean, we talked about it much like most of the guys with their consistency. Marvin Jones, he last week against Chicago, 17 points. He had 116 yards and a touchdown. He had 2 bad weeks, but then prior to that, he had 3 very good weeks against Indy. He had almost 16 points in week 8 against Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is one of the best pass defenses in football. So,
well, speaking of Indy,
I believe they're 8th. So, Marvin Jones is one of those guys. I put Marvin Jones in like that Cole Beasley category where he's either going to kill you because you're going to start him and he's going to score you like 4 points, or he's going to blow up. So, he's one of those. But, like I said, Marvin Jones could have a good game this week.
So let's think about it like this: if Green Bay is blowing them out of the water, and that's what everybody's anticipating happening. Are you comfortable rolling out Marvin Jones in your flex the first week of the fantasy playoffs? Obviously, it depends on your other options, but if he was your only option, would you feel comfortable?
If he was my option and I had to put him in, would I be sweating it? Yeah, of course I'd be sweating it because he's also their top receiver. So, you just spoke about some of the cornerbacks for the Packers that are going to be playing. And
touche. You mentioned the Colts. Let's get to the Colts. Let's talk about a running back, Jonathan Taylor, the rookie out of the University of Wisconsin. Week 11 versus Green Bay, 13.4 points. Then he was on the COVID protocol. I don't know if he actually had COVID or if he was just on the protocol, but either way, he wasn't playing in week 12.
Right.
Came back in week 13 attempts, 91 yards, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 44 yards. Most importantly, 21 fantasy points. This Colts backfield is something that we've been talking about here at Fantasy and Frames ad nauseum about, like, we can never trust who's going to be. I think week 12 actually may have been the only exception where there was no Jonathan Taylor. And it's like, well, Nyheim Hines, he's the guy. They're going to throw it to him a lot. And they did. He got you modest fantasy point production. I want to say he got you either 10 or 13 fantasy points, depending on your scoring settings. But Jonathan Taylor's back. He looked great last week. Maybe this is what the Colts have been waiting for. Maybe they've been trying to like ease him into the season. And now that we're getting around the time where teams are making the push to making the playoffs and want to do well in the playoffs, they're going to unleash this rookie here this week. He has a great matchup against Houston. How do you feel about Jonathan Taylor this week in terms of like his opportunity versus, the whole narrative that maybe they've been saving him for this time of year?
Well, if they have, good for them, because he's paid them back, like you said, the last couple of weeks against Green Bay and Houston. He's been balling. I mean, I think he, like you said, he had the COVID issues. I think he's had a couple injury issues, if I'm not mistaken,
Hmm.
throughout the season. So again, with Indianapolis, when you're talking about what's in the cupboard past Jonathan Taylor, it's not the greatest choices. Naeem Hines
I mean,
has
Naeem Hines is great for a PPR situation,
he's had moments.
right?
But
And I think I think some of those moments come from the fact that when they're in close games or trailing from behind, they need to hurry up and score quickly, and the fastest way to do that is throwing the ball to somebody versus
right.
rushing it. This week, I don't know. I don't know if Houston's going to put up a lot of numbers against the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts have a great defense.
Yeah.
DeForest Buckner at defensive tackle. You should be starting him in your defensive lineman spot if you have one available. Darius Leonard, he's the consummate All-Pro linebacker. He was drafted as the number one linebacker overall for fantasy football purposes. He probably will be again next year if TJ Watt doesn't have something to say about it. Kari Willis has been playing well, although the past couple weeks he is, he's been on a little downward trend, but
If
he'll
I'm not
bounce
mistaken,
back.
and if I'm not mistaken, I think I just saw David Johnson's going to be out this week.
Yeah. So again, I don't see them utilizing this receiving game as much as they had been in previous weeks. So this could be a Jonathan Taylor blow up game, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, they're good. Indianapolis may go up big early and then just coast running it. Taylor's may get a lot of carries this week.
Right. Speaking of a lot of carries in rushing volume, David Montgomery. There have been a lot of people. Ken, I know you're not a huge Twitter person, but fantasy football Twitter, very conflicted on David Montgomery. I think that's the best way to describe it. A lot of people drafted him in the 4th round, thinking that they were going to get a good RB2 or at least a solid flex play investment. And he's been very streaky. And I think people were expecting him to put up a lot more production. When Tariq Cohen went down with his ACL injury, everyone was thinking, are they going to bring in a running back to be the pass catching back? And it turned out to be the case where no, they were going to give him, 5 targets a game, for a good stretch of time. And that was going to raise David Montgomery's fantasy value. And, it did, but it didn't. He in week 2, he had a fantasy game of 20.2 and half PPR scoring. Then he went to 6 points, 9 points. Then he had a couple double-digit games. Then he went back to 9 points. And then he had an 11-point game and a 3.7-point game. And just very up and down, not what you were hoping to get for when you drafted him. But in recent weeks, and I have no idea what's going on other than the fact that the schedule in terms of running backs, defenses versus running backs has gotten easier. He's been playing lights out. In Green Bay, 11 attempts, had 103 yards and 22.8 fantasy points last week against Detroit. Another soft defense versus running backs. 17 attempts for 72 yards. I can talk. And 2 touchdowns for 25 fantasy points. I think fantasy managers who made the investment in Montgomery and who have not quit on him are about to reap the benefits here, because his schedule is looking really good going forward against some really good teams, against really bad teams who against the run. So this could be a mandatory David Montgomery play week in and week out going forward. Let's talk about a running back we're not too thrilled about facing the number 1 rush defense in the NFL. Why don't you take that away, Ken?
That's going to be Miles Sanders of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the Philadelphia Eagles, everything about their team is a mess this year. They're going to be their offensive line is a mess. Their Carson Wentz has finally been pulled, so Jalen Hurts is going to be starting this week. So, and now they're going up against the best rush defense in football.
Let me ask you a question. From a fantasy perspective, do you think it's a good thing that Jalen Hurts is the quarterback?
He's more mobile. I don't know if he's more mobile than Wentz.
Yeah, this is a very good point. They're both, mobile quarterbacks behind a bad offensive line.
Yeah.
And
no real receivers.
No, exactly. No real receivers. They don't commit to Miles Sanders 100%, because you see Boston Scott running there. They activated Jordan Howard, which that came out of nowhere. And he's
back in Philadelphia.
He's back in Philadelphia, and he's taking snaps away from Miles Sanders. And now you have a bad offensive line. Jason Peters just went on IR which, by the way, isn't it amazing that Jason Peters always goes back to Philadelphia? Like, oh, he's old, he's getting out of shape, he's done in Philly. And then like a week before the season starts, you're like, oh, let's bring Jason Peters back,
One more year.
So he's gone. That offensive line got weaker. You got an inexperienced quarterback. I'm down on Miles Sanders as well. I would start David Montgomery over Miles Sanders.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I'm not down on. That's the thing, though. It's funny. I'm not down on Miles Sanders because of how bad Miles Sanders is. I'm down on Miles Sanders because everything around him is falling apart.
No, exactly. He's a great talent, but you're only good as the pieces around you.
I mean, he's had some good games. He had 22 points against Pittsburgh. 2 touchdowns. Against Baltimore, he had 118 yards. So he has the talent to even overcome Drek, as they say.
Right.
But
well, speaking of Drek, which I'm assuming means
segue.
bad things. The Dallas Cowboys versus the Cincinnati Bengals. This is going to be painful to watch, but of course, for fantasy football purposes, we're going to be doing so. And let's get into some wide receivers, specifically for this game. The rookie T. Higgins has been playing very, very, very well this season. He's gotten you mostly double-digit fantasy points. He's gotten you a couple 100 yards games, but really, where he's really excelling is getting you touchdowns. 5 on the season, 729 yards. When he goes off, it's touchdown dependent. And so the question is this an opportunity for him to go off this week? Well, according to Pro Football Focus, where he's lined up on the field pairs him off with a cornerback for the Dallas Cowboys that you and I know very well since their very first episode. We've been talking his name.
Have you been practicing his name?
Chidobe Awuzie.
There you go.
We love Chidobe Awuzie. We got to get him on the podcast. Big fan. Guess what percentage of passes he's allowing the receivers that he guards to catch?
I'm going to defer to you. I know it, but I'm going to see if you know it.
I know it because I'm looking right at the stat. I thought you were going to take a guess.
Cheater.
I am. So there we go. 74% of passes thrown his way, the receivers he's guarding catches. That's no bueno.
That's
not good.
Chidobe is going to go Awuzie soon if he keeps letting that.
Exactly. So look, I know Jonah Williams is gone for the Cincinnati Bengals, aka the left tackle for the Bengals. That offensive line is just horrible. The Cowboys have good pass rushers in Aldon Smith and DeMarcus Lawrence who could take advantage of that and get to.
And Ryan Finley.
Ryan Finley, he's not even. It's Brandon Allen now.
Oh, okay, I didn't see it.
Finley was supposed to be the guy, and then he got hurt, so then went to Brandon Allen. Remarkably, though, Brandon Allen has not been playing horribly. Like, not somebody you would ever start, but not horribly. Like, I would expect him to be on the ground every single play, and for some reason, he's still fantasy viable to a certain degree, or at least making his receivers fantasy viable. Tyler Boyd had that big game last week against the Dolphins, and I think this week, going against Chidobe Awuzie, T. Higgins has the opportunity for a big play down the field and an opportunity to get into the end zone. Really confident about that. So that's somebody that I feel managers who are looking for a good flex option who may not have a Tyler Boyd, who also has a good matchup against Jordan Lewis this week. But if you don't have Tyler Boyd on your roster and T. Higgins is available, he's somebody who I think you should feel very confident in starting this week.
And Dallas really just looks like they just look like a team that's just given up.
Yeah, if I was going to start any Dallas Cowboy, it would be Amari Cooper because you know the expression can follow the money.
Yep.
Yeah. Something tells me Jerry Jones is like, hey, we just paid this guy 5 years, $100 million. You make sure he gets the ball. And whatever kind of football talk that is translated into, I think has gotten to Mike McCarthy. Somebody that I was very high on in the preseason was Michael Gallup. He had his first really good week against the Baltimore Ravens this past week on on Tuesday Night Football. His first really good week since facing the Seattle Seahawks earlier in the season. But it's been Cooper who's been consistent with at least 10 or 11, 13 max fantasy points per game the past, I want to say, 6 or 7 games. He is their wide receiver one, and you have to expect Andy Dalton in this revenge game
I
against.
was I was going to say a sneaky thing that you may have to look at in this game is, and it has nothing to do with stats or nothing, that Andy Dalton's first game against his former team.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if he's going to throw it to anybody, I think he's going to do it to Amari Cooper. The targets are there for Amari Cooper. His opportunity has been there, more targets than the other wide receiving options on the team. So I think consistency's sake, Amari Cooper is your safe play in this game. Let's talk about now. You mentioned him earlier. You were comparing him. I forget who you were comparing him to, but it doesn't matter. Let's talk about Cole Beasley. He had himself a monstrous matchup against the San Francisco 49ers, putting up at least 20 fantasy points in half PPR scoring. This week, the slot wide receiver is going against the Pittsburgh Steelers, going against Mike Hilton. And so Mike Hilton, Ken, I'm not sure if you know, in terms of fantasy football purposes, as a defensive back, was the defensive back one. He was making tackles all over the place. He then got hurt midway through the season. He was out for a few weeks. And then he came back and he just didn't look the same. He didn't look the same until this past Monday versus the Washington football team, where he was guarding Logan Thomas because Logan Thomas was running out of the slot position and just tearing up.
Logan Thomas destroyed him.
No, Logan Thomas destroyed the Steelers. Like it was really quite impressive. He was the only receiving option that you can consistently count on for Washington in that matchup. But Mike Hilton made a lot of tackles and made a lot of plays on the ball. He didn't get you an interception, but he was swatting passes down. And so that is a bit concerning going against Cole Beasley this week. That being said, there are reports that Mike Hilton might see a decrease in snaps because the incumbent who was there before Mike Hilton came back from injury, who has been dealing with an injury himself, is returning to practice. So there could be some decrease in snaps for Mike Hilton coming up this week on Sunday Night Football, which is great for Cole Beasley. Put in somebody who may not be as good as Mike Hilton, or at least decrease the opportunity to go one-on-one with Mike Hilton, frees up Cole Beasley to do some damage. Josh Allen loves Cole Beasley. Yeah. Everyone's saying that this is going to be a tough defensive matchup, the Pittsburgh Steelers versus Buffalo Bills. I'm actually of the belief that Buffalo is going to really hand it to Pittsburgh and hand them their second loss this week.
Yeah, Pittsburgh. You got to sort of take away the game last week against Washington. I mean, they were playing their third game in 12 days. So
that might have been time.
That's a good argument. But to not excuse that, they haven't looked good as a team. They haven't looked good in the last few weeks. I think Mike Tomlin called them the JV team a couple weeks ago.
Wow, I do not know that.
It was something like that. So they haven't looked good the last few weeks, and they really got to be careful because if they lose this game, that brings Cleveland back into the division talk. Pittsburgh was undefeated and they were running away with it. Cleveland wins, Pittsburgh loses, and Cleveland's only, I think, a game behind. So
yeah, and then they have the matchup against the Ravens. So if they beat the Ravens in Monday Night Football, this could be coming down to a final matchup between these two teams for the division title.
Yeah. So, but yeah. By the way, I was comparing Marvin Jones to Cole Beasley.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some tight ends. Well, first of all, before we get to tight ends, look, Deontay Johnson, wide receiver for the Steelers. He's the guy that you feel most comfortable starting. Chase Claypool, he could be paired up against Tre'Davious White, the cornerback for the Buffalo Bills. That could kind of lessen his productivity, getting the ball and then making plays with it. I have no doubt that he'll get targeted downfield and get those receptions. But as far as being able to turn upfield, Tre'Davious White is really good at stopping yards after the catch. So don't expect too many home run plays or big plays after the catch for Chase Claypool this week. Okay, let's get to tight ends. Um, let me start with somebody that I don't like, and that's Rob Gronkowski. This Minnesota defense is really, really good in terms of linebackers and strong safety. Harrison Smith, great strong safety in terms of tackle production from both an IDP perspective as well as a real football perspective. Eric Kendricks and Eric Wilson, we call them the Eric brothers. Eric Kendricks is, probably one of the top five, if not top 10, or I should say top 10, if not top five linebackers in all of football, as well as in fantasy football. He actually hurt himself in pregame warmups, Ken, last week, which is like, how does that happen that you hurt yourself in pregame warmups and then you're out for the game?
Yeah,
And
you sprain a hammy, you're trying to do your yoga stretches, and
I mean, the timing on that is just
downward dog
remarkable.
doesn't do well. So yeah,
I mean, I guess, yes, I guess I can understand how that happens, but like,
yeah,
how does that happen? You know,
right, exactly.
how does this, how does the world and life make that happen
You don't
at
you
that
don't
point of
go
the
from
game?
perfectly healthy to out of the game in warmups. That's kind of weird.
That is a very good point. I didn't think about that.
Some guys, it's like, they got to go through warmups. They've been hurt all week. They haven't practiced here and there, and then they went through warmups, and yeah, it's not a go. If you're 100% going into the game and then done,
Yeah,
you better get run over.
that's a
You
little
better get run
troubling.
over by a cart or something like that.
Yeah, that is a little troubling, which then opens the door for more opportunities for fellow linebacker, fellow Eric brother Eric Wilson, who he kind of is more of the I'll tackle the running back, I'll apply pressure to the quarterback, but I'll play in coverage type of linebacker, similar to the Jalen Smith and the Devin White mold that we were talking about. Eric Wilson, his snap playing time has really increased this season. He's a solid IDP option for those who have Eric Kendricks and may not. If Kendricks doesn't play this week, Eric Wilson, slide him right in. I think he'll get good production. Wilson played well last week in relief of Kendricks in terms of his responsibilities. Where I'm going with this is talking about tight ends and Rob Gronkowski. I'm giving you the overall picture here, folks. I'm talking about all aspects of the game so you can kind of understand the thought process of where we're going in terms of how we're making these decisions, if you should like somebody or not like somebody in your roster. You have a great tight end going against a great safety and a great coverage linebacker. That's going to limit his upside a little bit. So the secondary, the cornerbacks for the Vikings, I think I'm more susceptible to the pass. If Godwin should play, Chris Godwin for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers should play. Mike Evans is questionable to play. You know who's not questionable and who is in a good position to have a really big game? Antonio Brown. I think this is Antonio Brown's coming out party this week versus the Vikings. Versus the Vikings. So I'm more confident in Antonio Brown getting more passes and more productivity than I am for Rob Gronkowski. So if, for example, I had Logan Thomas available, if I had TJ Hawkinson available, Mike Gesicki going against the Kansas City Chiefs, where the Dolphins are more than likely to be playing from behind. And by I say more than likely, I mean definitely playing from behind. The reception upside is there for Gesicki. I'd play all those guys over Rob Gronkowski this week, given the defensive mismatch.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like Gronkowski this year has started to fall into the Jason Witten look.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
he was a great he's a Hall of Fame tight end. Jason Witten is a Hall of Fame tight end. They're there. They're there. They're good. They'll have games like he had last week against Kansas City, 106 yards. But even last week it was the most receptions he's had in a game all season. It tied with the week 3 against Denver. He had 6 receptions. He was targeted 7 times. It's not the Gronkowski of old. If you're banking on Gronkowski to get you a ton of points, it's going to be tough. And against this Minnesota defense, that does give up points to tight ends. They do, but it's a good defense.
Well, I think I
It's
was.
hard, it's hard to it. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's hard to depend on a guy who's on the downside of his career to get you those points against a good defense.
I agree 100% with everything you just said. Let's talk about now another linebacker. Let's cover some IDP real quick. Neville Hewitt of the New York Jets has been playing like a linebacker one the past 3 weeks using fantasy data, IDP scoring, 11 points, 13 points, 15 3-points. Let's talk about the actual statistic production. 11 total tackles, 6 total tackles with a sack. Last week, 12 total tackles with a sack. He's been playing lights out. I'd feel starting Neville Hewitt at linebacker as my linebacker one than I would this following linebacker, which is going to kind of send shockwaves through the IDP circles here online, on Twitter, definitely. Bobby Wagner. Let me preface a few things here about Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner is probably one of the best linebackers in all of professional football. Okay. Bobby Wagner is probably going to go down as one of the best linebackers in fantasy football history. If there was a Hall of Fame for linebackers in fantasy football, he would be a first ballot Hall of Famer just due to his tackle production throughout the years. He, for so many years, he's somebody that you can count on double-digit fantasy points, whether it's fantasy data, IDP scoring, or as we use here at Fantasy and Frames, we use Fantasy Pros IDP scoring to talk about fantasy points. Whatever the metric is, he's getting you double-digit fantasy points over the course of his career. That is until Jamal Adams got traded from the New York Jets. Ironically, revenge game narrative. But got traded to the Seattle Seahawks. Jamal Adams is, there are men, and then there's Jamal Adams when it comes to performance on the football field, on the defensive side of the football field. He, the past few weeks, has gotten 9 total tackles, 11 total tackles. Compare that to Bobby Wagner, who's gotten 4 total tackles and 6 total tackles. Why am I bringing up the tackle numbers? The tackle numbers are being brought up because Jamal Adams is getting to the ball carrier. First of all, he's everywhere. He can play in coverage. He can play close to the line of scrimmage. He can rush the quarterback. He can get sacks. He can get to the running back before they get head of steam going in the backfield. He's getting to wherever the ball is faster. Go figure, because he's a smaller player than Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner, when Jamal Adams was out, due to injury this year, his production was great. It was what we were expecting. It's give us the double-digit points, get us close to double-digit tackles. That's not happening with Jamal Adams on the field. And I feel like having Jamal Adams on the field who's faster at getting to these players, it's capping Bobby Wagner's upside. That is very concerning. I have Bobby Wagner on one of my teams, and I'm sitting him for Devin White. I know that's hashtag, first world fantasy football problems here. Right. But let's just say if Neville Hewitt was available, which he's not, which thank God, because that means I'm playing with competent people in my league. If Neville Hewitt was available on the waiver wire going forward, I'd actually feel comfortable starting Neville Hewitt in terms of his tackle upside than I would Bobby Wagner. And I know that's a controversial statement, but I truly believe that Jamal Adams is capping his potential, not only this year, but potentially for years to come. So, just take that for what it is. That's my analysis, and I'm sticking to it.
Hey, if you're gonna make a case, that's the way to make the case.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I figured just coming out and saying, "Hey, I don't like this player because I don't like them," wasn't good enough. I feel the Four-Eyed fans deserve better.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. If you're gonna say you don't like somebody, back it up.
Right.
Definitely back it up. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how Neville Hewitt. How he plays this week and how the whole Jets defense plays this week after the absolute debacle of what happened last week against the Raiders.
Well, there's no Greg Williams anymore.
Yeah, so bad that they fired the 0-12 Jets were so embarrassed by what happened last week. They still haven't fired Adam Gase yet. but Greg Williams sending a blitz when the Raiders need to throw a Hail Mary and the ball just sails softly into, I think it was Henry Ruggs.
Yes, Ruggs, exactly.
Right into Henry Ruggs' hands, full stride, in stride, and he walks into the end zone. I mean, I have friends who are Jets fans, and I was actually watching it when it happened on on my phone because I was out somewhere and I was with some people, and we were watching it happen on the phone, and one of the guys is a Jets fan, and just the look on his face was I don't know how you could be a Jets fan.
It's hard. I mean, I don't know. I'm suffering in Washington, so I'm not one to talk.
True, and and basketball. I'm a Knicks fan, so what do I got?
Wow, you exist.
Yeah. Hey, we're still out there. Me and Spike Lee.
Yeah, and I was driving home today listening to Max Kellerman, because that was the only option I had. I would never go out of my way to listen, but somebody asked him, "Are you going to give the Knicks some positive comments heading into the preseason? Like, will you stop giving them a hard time?" I guess was basically the point of the question, and he said, "No doubt." I have no doubt that the Knicks are going to be horrible this season. So no, I'm not going to give them any props. So kudos to you for being a Knicks fan, still being a Knicks fan.
That's what being a real fan is. You stick with the team through the good times and bad.
So Nate Markham, who you can find at Nate Markham on Twitter, he does our Four-Eyed Waiver Wire article for IDP. He's a great IDP resource. Nate, what he's learned about IDP since his time here at Fantasy and Frames has been fantastic. He's truly one of the great follows in IDP circles you should be paying attention to. And somebody he's been talking about, whether it's, in articles or on our shows, our live stream shows or podcasts, Quinnen Williams, a defensive lineman for the New York Jets, the past couple weeks, 7 total tackles, 1.5 sacks, 4 total tackles, 1 sacks, 3 quarterback hits a piece the past couple games, double-digit fantasy points, and whatever scoring settings you're using, he's getting you double-digit fantasy points because of the sacks. He's applying so much pressure to opposing quarterbacks. He is living up to his I believe it's the first round draft.
He was the number 3 overall pick in the draft, 2019 draft.
Okay. He's living up to that right now for the New York Jets. And here's the thing with the Jets. For those who may be like, I still can't get over Jorge said that, Neville Hewitt is going to have more opportunity than Bobby Wagner. Let me ask you a question, folks. And I want you to think about this really quickly. Who do you think is going to be on the field more in this game? Seattle's offense? Seattle's defense or New York's defense? Let me ask you another question. Which offense do you think is going to be more proficient? Seattle's or New York's? I'm going to go with Seattle in terms of offense, which means the Jets are going to be on the field on defense a lot. And that means more opportunity. The more opportunity you have to make plays translates into more fantasy point production. Quinnen Williams, Neville Hewitt, I think, are definite must starts this week for the New York Jets. Let's talk about
the Jets would have the start of a very good defense if Jamal Adams was still there, but
Well, and of course, the guy they traded for him, as well as with the draft picks, Bradley McDougall, he's on IR. So it really did not work out for New York. Nothing's been working out for New York, to be honest with you. Let's go to now.
By the way, I'm sorry, I know you want to keep going, but it's why a quick thing. You just talk about a trade by a New York team. It's why what's it called with the Giants when they traded Odell Beckham. Who'd they get back?
Zeitler, is that right?
No, it was what's his name? Oh my God!
It was Zeitler, the lineman, the offensive lineman. Oh, you're talking about Jabril Peppers.
Jabril Peppers. Sorry, this is what happens when I told Jorge this before the podcast. I'm getting old. Names just drop out of my head immediately. It's the weirdest thing.
You said it, not me. Okay.
Yeah, I did. But yeah, Peppers has had a great year. Just to segue a little bit off of it, but making a trade of a very good, a great player like Odell Beckham to Cleveland, they get Peppers, and Peppers has been awesome. So
yeah, he's a must start IDP strong safety / defensive back. Absolutely, 100% agree.
Yep.
Let's talk about some people that we don't. Or let's keep going with people that we do like. And then I'm going to
Let's
finish
keep
off
this
with,
positive.
yeah, let's keep positive, and then we're going to end with some negativity because that's going to get you frothing at the mouth and get you all hyped up for the fantasy playoffs. Let's go to New Orleans. Our guy Nate. We talked about him. We actually tweeted, called him the hashtag tackle machine, and he liked one of our tweets early on, which was a
I love
huge
him.
deal back in
Always
the
a fan.
day. Demario Davis,
Mario Davis.
a linebacker for the New Orleans Saints. He's definitely a must start. Malcolm Jenkins at strong safety has big playmaking potential. He is somebody I would start if there was an injury to one of my strong safeties / defensive backs. I wouldn't go out of my way to insert him, but he definitely has the upside. I'm talking the next player for the Saints that I'm really comfortable starting this week is Trey Hendrickson, defensive lineman. He leads the team in sacks with 10.5. I rather play him than somebody that most people would say, how could you talk ill of this player? I'm talking about Cameron Jordan. Look,
You going there? I was gonna say, don't say it.
I'm going to go there. Look, I'm sorry. Like,
Provocative.
I am somebody who's of the belief that, and it's hard when I say belief, I mean, I'm looking at numbers in front of me. So it's kind of easy to say I'm believing in this because the facts are facts. He is really good for a couple games where he just goes nuts. Like in week 11, he had 3 sacks and 3 quarterback hits. Week 12, a sack and 4 quarterback hits. Um, this past week in week 13, he had 2 tackles and a quarterback hit. Just to put that in perspective from fantasy points, let's use fantasy data's IDP scoring settings. Week 11, the 3 sack game, he got you 17.4 points. Holy crap, I got to start Cameron Jordan every week. Week 12, he got you 10.1 fantasy points. Oh my God, this was such a great idea. Let me keep using Cameron Jordan because he's just playing lights out. I'm getting double-digit fantasy points. Woohoo! Week 13, he got you 3 points. And I guarantee you have more of those games from him, those 3-point games, and you get these, monster games. He's completely sack dependent, which hashtag phrasing, that is hilarious now that I think about it and said it out loud. But he is. Trey Hendrickson, he is also sack dependent. Don't get me wrong. Like he's got 10.5 sacks because he's playing opposite of Cameron Jordan. But that's the beauty of Trey Hendrickson. His ability to make plays on the ball because offensive linemen are keying in on Cameron Jordan because the hype is there for Cameron Jordan is allowing Hendrickson to perform better. And as long as that stays the case, I will always say this season, go Hendrickson over Cameron Jordan if he's available there. In terms of other plays, let's talk about somebody who I'm not a big fan of as well. Khalil Mack, and I've wrote about him. We've talked about him at nauseum, but I just got to keep telling people because, Ken, if I told you Khalil Mack, you would say, what about him as a defensive player?
One of the best linebackers in football.
Great. You and I both know just because somebody is a great player in real football does not make them a real great player in fantasy football. We've known that about players on offense, and the same can be true on defense. And the fact of the matter is, much like a Cameron Jordan, who offenses key on and is blocking and stopping from getting to the quarterback, opposing offenses do the exact same thing to Khalil Mack. Unfortunately, there's nobody else along the Bears defensive line outside of Akeem Hicks, and even he's been playing kind of down lately, that you can really count on from a pass rushing perspective. For Chicago, the only person you want to really count on is Roquan Smith, who's, I believe, the LB9 in solo tackle production on the season. Using fantasy data, IDP scoring, I believe he's the top 3 or at least top 5 IDP scoring player, period. So he's the only person for Chicago I feel comfortable starting, and you're not finding him on your waiver wire. He's taken and he's being started. Yeah. For Green Bay, let's talk about Green Bay. I talked about Darnell Savage, why I don't think he has a great matchup this week against the Lions. Za'Darius Smith, on the other hand, great pass rusher. He's one of the best pass rushers in all of the NFL. He's definitely a must start. On Detroit's side, Romeo Okwara, he's been playing lights out. He's another guy who's benefiting from playing, down the line from another all-pro defensive lineman. That being said, Okwara, I would start him next week, week 16. Great. This week, Not so much because Green Bay's offensive line is one of the best when it comes to pass protection. He's not getting to Aaron Rodgers. So I wouldn't waste your time putting Aquara in there. But he does have good potential going forward.
Hurts my heart to see how great he's playing since he was a 5th-round pick by
Was
the
he a
Giants.
Giant?
He was a Giant. He was drafted by the Giants in the 5th round. Played 2 seasons.
Oh, maybe him. Okay. And last but not least, let's just round off somebody that we don't like. Kyle Van Noy, linebacker, Miami Dolphins. For much of the season, Ken, we were talking about these Dolphins linebackers, whether it's Jerome Baker or Kyle Van Noy, as people that you can kind of like look at and see them being somewhat comparable in terms of potential from a real football perspective, as well as most importantly, a fantasy football perspective. Then something happened, whether it's injuries or just, scheme changes or something went wrong. And both of these players have been very inconsistent. And then, of course, you get a big performance from Kyle Van Noy last week, or 2 weeks ago, rather, where he had like 3 sacks, right?
It was last week.
And then in week 13, that was week 12, he had 3 sacks, I believe, right?
No, it was week 13, again, last week against Cincinnati.
Yeah, 3 sacks.
He had 3 sacks.
He had like 21 fantasy points, or at least, the high double-digit fantasy point numbers. But he's too inconsistent. Inconsistent. And Patrick Mahomes, he's going to get rid of the ball too quickly. I don't see any defensive lineman being a good fantasy option for Miami, or excuse me, linebacker, edge rusher. That's what I'm trying to say.
The best you could say with Kyle Van Noy this week is he's going to be running all over the place. That he, whether he's going to be tailing Travis Kelce or what's going to happen, but he's going to be all over the place. And
yeah, he's not going to get that. They're going to be spreading the ball around so much he's going to have his head spinning.
Yeah,
not a good IDP option.
Yeah.
And so those are the players we're going to talk about today. Sorry for going off script a little bit, but you know what? You're entering the world of what it's like to have a normal conversation with Ken and I outside of the world of being in front of a camera for fantasy football purposes. But Ken, let's do something again unscripted that we didn't talk about, but I think is very important for people to realize heading into their fantasy football matchups. Let's give the Four-Eyed fans here just one lesson that they should apply in terms of like a life lesson for fantasy football once they get to the playoffs. I'll start us off since I threw this at you last minute. Just like we've said in the regular season and preached this, don't let name value of a player skew whether or not you should skew your opinion and your judgment of whether you should start that player. Okay. And I'll use Ken and a great example. Wayne Gallman. Okay. If I said, if just on name value alone, okay, Wayne Gallman or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Okay. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the rookie running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. Everybody's like, oh, he's going to be the next great Kansas City Chief, or Andy Reid running back is going to be super fantasy relevant. If he was so fantasy relevant, why'd they have to bring in Le'Veon Bell? And to be fair, both of these running backs have not been playing that well, since they've been joined at the hip. Hilaire really, Andy Reid really screwed over fantasy managers a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week. My dates are all screwed up right now. Where he listed him as active, but he got 0 fantasy points. So that cost people fantasy football playoff opportunities. But where I'm going with this is the hype behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The Chiefs, the great high-powered offense. There's, Andy Reid running back. This is going to be a fantasy match made in heaven. Okay, it hasn't been that way. But you're looking at the name on the back of the jersey and you're thinking, oh my God, the hype. You see Gallman on the back of a jersey and you're like, ugh, what's a Gallman? Is that like a gallstone? Like who is Wayne Gallstone? Wayne Gallstone, aka Wayne Gallman, has been putting up RB2 numbers for the past 4 or 5 weeks. He's riding a hot hand on a Giants team that's surging. You're playing Wayne Gallman over Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and you're not even thinking twice about it. Mm-hmm. So don't let name value skew your judgment in terms of how you set your lineups. Play the players that are playing well. Mm-hmm. Don't just play a player that has a high-profile name because they just have a high-profile name. No, be smart about it. Be consistent. Be consistent with how you're playing. Play like you would in the regular season. Play what made you successful. Use the strategies that made you successful in the regular season, because nothing's changed from that perspective of how you approach fantasy football. Like, keep doing what brought you to the dance would be my advice.
Don't Kevin Cash it.
Say what?
Don't Kevin Cash it.
Who's Kevin Cash?
Kevin Cash is the manager of the Tampa Bay Rays. Switching sports, got killed because he pulled Blake Snell, who is their starting pitcher, Cy Young winner, was mowing the Dodgers down. The Dodgers couldn't touch him in the World Series. Couldn't touch him. But because of this thinking in baseball, when you get to the playoffs where you can't let the pitcher go too far because he may end up blowing it, he pulled Blake Snell in, I believe, the 6th inning of the clinching game when they were up 2-0. Pulls Blake Snell. Guess what happens? 4 batters later, the Rays are losing.
Yeah.
And they lose the World Series. So that's what I'm saying. It's a long way to go to give you an example of what you're saying is don't overthink it. Do what you've done the whole season.
So what's the advice that you want to give to those people, Ken, that are listening?
My advice, it's one that I think I've given before, but I've been in New Zealand these last couple months.
Chasing bats. We know. Yeah.
Chasing bats. Yeah. And it's actually something I was talking to some friends about the other day. It didn't have to do with fantasy football, but it still applies here. Numbers can be manipulated. When you are looking, like particularly when you were talking about the difference with Hendrickson and Cameron Jordan with New Orleans, when looking at the numbers, Cameron Jordan could have better overall stats. You can look at somebody and say, hey, they have an average of 10 fantasy points per game. Look deeper into those stats, because if I have a game where I've scored 20 points and I have a game where I've scored 0 points, that's a 10-point average. But that game where where that guy scored 0 points, you are hating life.
Right.
So my even now, even when you're trying to pick up players off the waiver wire and you're in the playoffs and maybe you need a quarterback sort of like a Billy Volek or somebody like that.
You still sore about that Billy Volek loss, are you?
Oh God, I'll go to my grave cursing the name Billy Volek. But I'll just look at the stats. Do a quick study of the stats. The guy who's third. If you look at the list of players, whatever on your, if you're looking for a linebacker or defensive end or something, and you look at the top guy, and the top guy has an average again of 12 points per game, but his average is all skewed because he probably had a couple big scoring games. Cameron Jordan has had some big scoring games, but he's also disappeared in some games. Hendrickson has Hendricks. Is it Hendricks or Hendrickson? I'm sorry.
Trey Hendrickson.
Trey Hendrickson, yeah. He's been very consistent throughout the season. It's not a huge number, but it's been very consistent. He gets your numbers. So that's my advice. When you are looking at stats, when you're looking at numbers, when you're looking at points, numbers and stats can be manipulated. Don't fall for it when you see something that might be a little bit too good to be true.
Case in point, if you recall last year in the playoffs, Ken, you had both Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson. And because Deshaun Watson had the better matchup, you went Deshaun Watson when you should have just stayed with what brought you to the dance, which was Lamar Jackson.
Lamar Jackson, I think, threw 5 touchdowns.
It was against, ironically, the Jets, as we were talking about them earlier.
Now, to be fair, Deshaun Watson did have a good game. He did live up to some of the stats that I was expecting. But again, Lamar Jackson was having maybe the greatest fantasy season ever for a quarterback.
Right.
There was
okay. So maybe that wasn't the greatest example, but
it was a great example because instead of I played what the stats told me. I played what yeah, I played what the stats told me, and it was manipulated. Like I said, the numbers are manipulated. You look at the stats for one, and you say, well, Deshaun Watson's having a great year. And by the way, me having Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson on the same team was
Criminal.
well, yeah, pretty much. But it was this. The stats told me one thing about, well, you really should start Deshaun Watson, but again, to go back to what you said, you then you got to go back to what have you seen? What does your eyes tell you? What have you seen the whole season? And that's where I got burned. Instead of saying what I've seen the whole season is Lamar Jackson having,
the best year. One of the best
Hall of
years.
Fame year.
Yeah.
I went with the stats, and the stats burned me.
So there you go, folks. Don't let name value skew your judgment, and don't let the numbers just that are right in front of you.
Numbers can be manipulated.
Numbers can be manipulated. So keep that in mind. Good luck this week. Don't forget, Sunday we're going to be covering every single game, every single fantasy relevant player. So players that we didn't get to tonight, you're going to hear about on Sunday. Reach out to us, follow us at Fantasy Frames on Twitter. Wherever you listen to podcasts, please, the Fourth and Frames podcast that you're listening to now, rate, review, subscribe. Let us know what we're doing well. Let us know what we're not doing well, so that way we can improve each and every season. We're going to be around in the off season. We're going to be introducing Dynasty fantasy football content, so you're going to be hearing a lot more from us year round. Which, hey, we're pretty cool people. So not to toot our own horn, but I think you would enjoy having conversations with us, is what I'm trying to say. Don't forget to listen to the Perfectly Framed podcast, our baseball component here at Fantasy and Frames. Aaron Pags, Nate Markham, Todd Barnes, the Bullpen Bros, hashtag Bullpen Bros. We're covering closers here at Fantasy and Frames. We're narrowing down on that niche of fantasy baseball. You'll really enjoy it. So listen to Perfectly Framed. So Ken, it's been great having you back, my friend.
It's good to be back. It's good to be back in civilization.
And then we're chasing bats, talking about fantasy football.
I can't guarantee that, but like I said, it's all for science.
There you go. All right, fans. Good luck this week. We'll see you Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Take care.